Before I say anything else, fanboy trigger warning. If you don't like your video game platform allegiances being questioned or criticized, please save me the headache and watch something else. You can unsubscribe, dislike, or whatever if you can't accept differing opinions. You can even rage in the comments. I promise I won't be offended. However, if you're a reasonable person that can listen, then respond, I'd love to see you down in the comments as well, even if you don't agree. Okay, now I'll give those other guys a few moments to leave. Are they gone? Okay, good. For whatever reason, some people have been holding out hope for Vita 2. Some would call them PlayStation fans. I would call them masochists. Switch's success has given them a new lease on life. Briefly, Nintendo's doing great in the handheld market. Sony can too, said totally logical people with deep knowledge of the handheld market. But I think they're flying too close to the sun. To be frank, Vita is categorically a failure, and a likely futile attempt to dissuade any vapid fanboy claims. So is Wii U. It's unrelated, but satisfied? Okay, I'm done poking the fanboy bear. No more tangents, promise. Yes, Vita had an active fan base, but it had a tiny active fan base that statistics say buys games, but statistics also say they don't buy many AAA games and virtually none of the exclusives. Can companies with small games and small teams make money on this fan base? 100%. Can Sony? Not really. Can small teams bankroll a successor to Vita? No. So that kind of kills that possibility right away. To be fair, many would point the finger at Sony for sabotaging the Vita, and I can't completely disagree with that. The decision to use unnecessarily expensive proprietary storage again in an attempt to fight piracy, which totally helped PSP Sony, despite the fact that, ironically, PSP's ability to be hacked to oblivion, I'd argue, is a big reason for its moderate success. But I'll get to that later. The addition of weird gimmicks that the Sony fanbase typically scoffs at, like touchscreens, a touch bar, motion controls, and a camera, a $250 starting price point that, unlike 3DS, remained at $250 even after its obvious downfall. A wasted 3G model, the marketing of Vita was all about console gaming on the go, which we kinda got in the early days with games like Uncharted Golden Abyss, crappy PS2 collection ports, and a few crossplay PS3 games like PlayStation All-Stars and Sly 4, but was ultimately dropped by Sony once Vita's continued decline seemed imminent, and they pivoted the marketing to bill Vita as an indie PlayStation classic and JRPG-infused high-end PlayStation 4 accessory. This left the Vita with no real selling point and no identity when stacked up against 3DS. Who cares how powerful the handheld is when its best new game is like Shovel Knight? Again, to be fair, Vita did enjoy the "but it's portable" selling point with a few current games from Bandai Namco and a few other third parties, but no real third parties of note, for America anyway. Which brings us to the elephant in the room. What about its success in Japan? Yeah, about that. During the majority of Vita's 5+ year long life, it had a relatively healthy existence in Japan. It became commonplace for Vita to be amongst the top 3 best-selling consoles every week. A respectable amount of those chart entries, it was number 1. The Vita even routinely outsold Sony's current golden child, PS4, in Japan. Vita software was no stranger to the top 10 charts either. If a game had a Vita version, it probably charted pretty high, largely because of the Vita. All of this is to say, yeah, it sounds impressive, and in an echo chamber in potentially a different time, it would actually be impressive, but Wii U also did all of these things, and Vita itself, according to Sony's last upfront report for Vita sales in Japan, combined with some Media Create numbers, has sold well under 10 million units in around 6 years, in a country that Vita fans herald as the Vita's life support. PSP, on the other hand, sold 3 times that in around the same time frame in Japan. What about the current landscape of smartphones, you may say? Well, 3DS sold even more than PSP in Japan. More specifically, around 4 times more than Vita did in Japan. Make no mistake, this is more the fault of the current Japanese gaming market than it is Vita's. The market shrunk. Nintendo will always demand the bulk of that handheld market, What allowed Sony to have respectable success in the past with PSP was the size of the market. There were about 50 million handhelds sold in Japan during that era, plenty of room for Sony to carve out a reasonable percentage. Worldwide, that market expands to well over 200 million. Fast forward to now, and the dedicated handheld market is way under 100 million. Nintendo has about 80% of that, like usual. The 20% just isn't enough to pay the bills these days. The silver lining is, for Sony, handheld consoles were always a side business. PS4 is their focus, and it's a successful thing to focus on. So I have to say, Andrew House is not speaking complete nonsense when he says there is no market for a Switch like PlayStation. There's no market for them because they can't compete unless they go all in on the hybrid concept, which they wouldn't because they can't. Just let them make great home consoles. Stop crying over spilt milk. But those are my thoughts. What do you think? Are you holding out hope for Vita, or are you like me and are fine with the PS4 and Switch? Let me know in the comments, and if you like this, click like, and after you're done, click one of the videos on the end card here, and subscribe for more videos like this every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern time. Okay, that's it for me. See you next week.